What if the biggest threat to Vladimir Putin isn't coming from Ukraine at all, but from his own people quietly refusing to fight? What if the war machine he built is now running out of the one thing it needs most? Willing soldiers. Before we go further, if you care about the truth behind this war, hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing, but it tells us to keep digging deeper. Subscribe if you haven't, and share this with one person who still thinks this war is going the way the Kremlin claims. For years, Putin told his country a simple story: fight now, win later, and Russia will stand taller than ever. That promise justified everything: the sanctions, the isolation, the empty grocery shelves, the sons who never came home. All of it was supposed to lead to one final glorious victory. But 4 years later, that story is falling apart in the most dangerous way possible. Not on the battlefield first, but inside Russian homes, inside Russian minds, and on Russian streets. Because here's the truth nobody in the Kremlin wants to say out loud. Wars are not won with tanks or missiles alone. They are won with people. Real men who are willing to put on a uniform and walk toward gunfire. And right now, fewer and fewer Russians are willing to do that. So what happens when a country stops volunteering for its own war? It starts hunting for soldiers instead of asking for them. Picture an ordinary street in Balashika, just outside Moscow. A man named Sergei is walking, minding his own business, when military police surround him. His friends shout for him to run, to resist, to not go quietly, but it's too late. He has already been marked. No contract signed, no agreement made, yet his fate is sealed in that instant. This isn't an isolated event caught on one lucky camera. It's a pattern now, and that pattern is spreading fast. It started quietly in a place called Penza, a region that most people outside Russia had never even heard of. Then it crept outward, region by region, until it reached all the way to Barnaul in Siberia, a city thousands of miles from Penza, thousands of miles from Moscow, thousands of miles from the war itself. Men there are being stopped, questioned, and loaded onto vehicles like cargo. Some are driven straight from the street to enlistment offices, and from there, straight to the front line. Think about that for a moment. A person leaves their house to buy bread, and within hours, they could be standing in a trench in eastern Ukraine. This is the reality unfolding across Russia right now, and it tells us something the Kremlin desperately wants to hide. The well of volunteers has run dry. Soldiers on the front are dying faster than new ones can be found. Desertion is rising. Streets are no longer safe for young men who match the right age and profile. And yet, even as this quiet crisis deepens, Moscow is reportedly preparing something on a scale that could change everything. According to Andrei Kovalenko, who leads Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation, Russia may be planning to mobilize around 500,000 new troops by this autumn. Let that number sink in. 500,000 people. That's not just a large army. That's the population of an entire city being pulled toward war all at once. What makes this plan even more alarming isn't just the size, it's the speed. Reports suggest that a portion of these newly mobilized troops could be sent to the Eastern Front just 2 weeks after being drafted. 2 weeks. Barely enough time to learn how to hold a rifle properly, let alone survive combat. The rest would get about a month of training before being placed in reserve, ready for a new front that hasn't even opened yet. Behind this staggering plan are two names that carry enormous weight inside the Kremlin: Sergei Kiriyenko, a powerful political strategist, and Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the general staff. These men reportedly believe that flooding the front with fresh bodies can finally break Ukraine's resistance. But Kovalenko, who watches Russian military movements closely, says something chilling in response. He believes they are completely wrong. To understand why this desperate plan exists, we need to look at the math the Kremlin is quietly struggling with, math that simply doesn't add up anymore. Here's the core problem. Russia is losing soldiers faster than it can replace them. According to intelligence gathered by Ukraine's foreign services in mid-2026, Russia managed to secure only around 195,000 of its planned 204,500 military contracts for the year. Meanwhile, its casualties within that same year had already climbed past 196,000. In other words, the losses are outpacing the recruitment. The bucket is emptying faster than it's being filled, and no amount of propaganda can hide arithmetic like that forever. And the recruitment numbers themselves tell a story of quiet collapse. A German analyst named Janis Klug, studying Russian budget data, found that during the first quarter of 2026, only around 800 people per day were signing military contracts. That was the lowest rate in 3 years. Regional bonuses pushed that number up slightly to about 1,000 per day in the following months, but even that wasn't enough. It still fell short of what the front actually needed. A Russian officer, serving in a unit based in Siberia, summed up the situation in words far more honest than anything coming out of Moscow. He said the flow of volunteers keeps shrinking, yet nobody has reduced the monthly quotas. So every single month, they are forced to send fresh recruits to fill gaps that keep growing wider, month after month, without pause. This isn't a temporary shortage, this is a structural crisis. And it leads to one unavoidable question. Not if mobilization happens, but when. Multiple independent sources seem to agree on a time frame. Many point toward right after Russia's regional elections in September, meaning a wave of mobilization could arrive sometime in October. That timing isn't random, it's calculated down to the calendar. Rewind back to September 2022, when Putin first announced partial mobilization. The backlash was immediate and massive. Long lines at border crossings, families torn apart overnight, public anger that the Kremlin hadn't seen in years. Putin and his party know that repeating that scene right before an election would be political suicide. So instead, they appear to be delaying the announcement until after votes are counted, hoping the damage will be easier to control once the ballots are already locked away. Now, it's worth being fair here. Much of this information comes from Ukrainian intelligence and dissident voices inside Russia, people who obviously have their own motivations for sharing it. Russian officials deny these claims outright, calling them enemy propaganda. Nothing has been officially confirmed yet. But even without an official announcement, the signs on the ground are already speaking louder than any government statement. Because when a government can't find volunteers, it doesn't wait quietly for them to show up. It starts hunting instead. If this kind of detail is exactly the sort of thing you come here for, drop a single word in the comments right now, watching, so we know real people are actually following along. It genuinely helps this video reach more viewers who need to see this side of the story. Nowhere is this hunting more visible than in the Penza region, which has quickly become a symbol of how desperate this search for soldiers has become. Locals describe security sweeps that supposedly target draft evaders or undocumented migrants. But in practice, the reality looks very different. Almost anyone walking the wrong street at the wrong time can be stopped, questioned, and handed a summons on the spot. Refuse to sign, and the pressure only intensifies until refusal stops feeling like an option at all. A local blogger named Morozov, who documented these raids in Penza, described just how deeply fear has settled into everyday life there. He said, stepping outside in the evening now feels dangerous. Nearly everyone in the city knows someone, a friend, a neighbor, a cousin, who was suddenly taken. Shortly after speaking out, Morozov himself was detained by Russian security services on charges of extremism. His silence didn't stop the story, it only confirmed it. And this isn't confined to one town. The same pattern of raids has now been documented in cities as far apart as Balashikha, near Moscow, and Barnaul, deep in Siberia. Two cities separated by thousands of miles, yet connected by the exact same tactic. Russia is no longer asking its men to fight. It's collecting them, one street corner at a time. To understand why so many are desperate to avoid this fate, you don't need statistics. You just need to listen to the men who are already there. In one leaked video, a Russian soldier speaks from inside a trench, his voice raw with exhaustion and fear. He describes his unit being fed into what he calls a meat grinder. Out of 100 men sent into one assault, he says only 12 came back. In another group, only a single soldier survived. And while commanders scream orders to keep pushing forward, he says the people making decisions safely in Moscow simply don't care what happens to men like him. This isn't just one soldier venting his frustration. The numbers back up every word of what he's describing, and behind those numbers lies a single overwhelming reason: Ukraine's drone technology. By 2026, drones had become the deciding factor on this battlefield in a way almost nobody predicted at the war's start. According to figures shared by Ukraine's leadership, more than 80% of Russian military targets are now being destroyed by drones, most of them built inside Ukraine itself. That level of drone dominance has no real precedent in modern warfare history. What used to take an artillery, battery, or a tank column can now be done by a single small aircraft controlled by a soldier hiding kilometers away. And it's not just happening at the front line. These same drones are now reaching deep into Russian territory, striking targets that once felt completely untouchable. Data from Ukraine's unmanned systems forces shows that successful deep strikes inside Russia rose by over 1,000% during 2026. In early July, a Ukrainian drone struck an oil refinery in Siberia, more than 2,500 kilometers from the front line. A target that had gone untouched since the war began was suddenly no longer safe, and that single strike sent a message to every Russian city that once felt far away from the fighting. The impact of this technology on ordinary soldiers is staggering. Ukrainian military data suggests that in a single month, over 35,000 Russian troops were killed or wounded, with drones responsible for nearly 96% of those casualties. Ukraine's commander-in-chief has told NATO officials that Russia is now losing around 1,000 soldiers every single day. This has completely flipped the math of the war. In the first half of 2026, Ukrainian authorities estimated that Russia was losing close to 8 soldiers for every single Ukrainian soldier lost. And perhaps the most brutal number of all measures land not lives directly, but what it costs to take it. In the first 3 months of 2026, Russia reportedly lost 316 soldiers for every single square kilometer of territory gained. The year before, that number had been 120. The price of ground is rising fast, and it's being paid in human lives, not in strategy meetings. Estimates about how long a new recruit survives are almost too grim to process. Some Russian military bloggers and historians suggest that once a recruit reaches training, they might have somewhere between 10 days and 3 weeks before facing real combat. Once they're actually on the front line, some sectors report survival windows as short as 20 to 35 minutes, 20 to 35 minutes from stepping into a trench to becoming a casualty. Knowing all this, would you want to go? Most Russians don't, and their bodies and minds are telling them so long before their government will admit it. For those who do try to refuse, the punishment can be severe. Leaked testimonies describe soldiers who resist deployment facing physical abuse and harsh coercion from their own commanders. In one video, a man explains, with visible fear in his voice, why he refuses to be sent to fight. He isn't alone. Hundreds of thousands of Russians are now choosing a different, far riskier path altogether. They're running. A Russian dissident based in Yerevan, Daniil Chebekin, compares what's happening now not to a modern conflict, but to the collapse Russia experienced during the First World War. Chebekin, who has been labeled an extremist by the Russian government, is also part of an underground network that helps soldiers desert the front line. He argues that, just like over a century ago, more and more Russian soldiers are beginning to realize they're fighting for goals that have nothing to do with their own lives or futures. Back then, entire military units simply walked away, discipline crumbled from the inside, and that collapse helped trigger a revolution that reshaped the entire country. Chebekin isn't saying history will repeat exactly, but he says the same question is spreading through Russian minds today, quietly, in kitchens and trenches alike. What exactly are we doing here? The scale of desertion backing up his theory is enormous. Some estimates place the number of deserters somewhere between 300,000 and 800,000 people. To put that into perspective, even a relatively small support network like Chebekin's group receives over 200 requests for help every single day. And his group isn't the only one. Others, like Idite Lesem and Stop the Army, are also flooded with desperate messages from soldiers trying to disappear before their names ever reach a deployment list. Two distinct groups of deserters seem to be emerging from all of this. The first are men who once believed in the war, who supported it or trusted the official story, but changed completely once they saw the reality of the front line with their own eyes. The second are younger conscripts, who got pulled into a system that was supposed to be temporary but has quietly become permanent, a rotating door that never seems to close. For those who can't escape but also can't keep fighting, there's one more option left: surrender. Russian soldiers are being actively encouraged, sometimes even by Ukraine itself, to surrender, rather than die pointlessly for ground that will likely be lost again within weeks. A hotline called I Want to Live now processes requests from Russian soldiers hoping to give themselves up safely, a quiet admission from thousands that survival now matters more than loyalty. With its own citizens increasingly unwilling to fight, the Kremlin has had to look elsewhere for manpower, and what it found is deeply unsettling. The first source has been Russia's prisons. For a while, the deal seemed almost transactional. Convicted criminals, mostly for lesser offenses like theft, were offered a pardon in exchange for military service, but that offer has since expanded dramatically. Even violent offenders, once legally barred from military duty, are now being recruited straight out of penal colonies and sent to the front, sometimes within days of their release papers being signed. We're now more than halfway through this story, and if you're still here, you're clearly someone who wants the full picture, not the headline version. So do us a small favor. Tap that share icon and send this to someone who still thinks this war is running smoothly for Moscow. Let them see the numbers for themselves. The second source of manpower stretches far beyond Russia's own borders, reaching all the way to Africa. Botswana's government recently issued a public warning after discovering a sharp rise in citizens being tricked or coerced into fighting for Russia. The pattern described is disturbingly simple. Young men are lured abroad with promises of good jobs, only to find themselves handed weapons and pushed toward the Ukrainian front line instead. Botswana's foreign ministry says it has received heartbreaking calls from citizens trapped in trenches, terrified and begging for help getting home. This isn't limited to one country either. Similar recruitment scams have reportedly been uncovered in Kenya and South Africa, with agents promising factory jobs, construction contracts, or hospitality work in Russia, only for victims to discover the truth once their passports have already been confiscated. According to organizations tracking African mercenaries fighting in this war, at least 316 Africans have already lost their lives on the Ukrainian battlefield. Kenya alone estimates that as many as 1,000 of its citizens have been swept into this conflict, many never intending to fight at all, and some never even understanding where they were being sent until it was far too late to turn back. And then there's North Korea, the most well-known of these foreign sources, supplying thousands of its own troops to help plug the gaps that Russia's own citizens refuse to fill. Soldiers from a country thousands of kilometers away, unfamiliar with the terrain, the language, or the cause, now fighting and dying in a European war that has nothing to do with their homeland. All of this raises an obvious question. If finding soldiers has become this difficult, why doesn't Putin simply announce full mobilization and be done with it? The answer goes back to a wound the Kremlin still hasn't fully healed, one that shapes almost every decision it makes today. In September 2022, when partial mobilization was first announced, the backlash was immediate and historic. Instead of strengthening the war effort, it triggered one of the largest exoduses in modern Russia. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people fled the country almost overnight, crossing land borders on foot when flights sold out within hours. But the real damage wasn't just in the numbers leaving, it was in who left. The people fleeing were disproportionately young, educated urban professionals, exactly the kind of talent any modern economy depends on to survive and grow. The technology sector was hit especially hard. In 2022 alone, roughly 10% of Russia's entire IT workforce packed up and left. A report from McKinsey estimated this brain drain cost Russia around $8 billion in lost national income that single year alone. The clearest proof of how deeply this hurt came directly from Putin himself. In 2023, he signed a decree raising the age limit for military exemptions, specifically for IT specialists, a quiet admission that losing skilled workers had been far more damaging than losing soldiers ever could be. That trauma explains the Kremlin's careful, almost hesitant approach today. A new wave of mass mobilization risks not just backlash on the streets, but a second devastating hit to an economy already strained by years of sanctions and war spending. The fear isn't only about people dying at the front, it's about the country quietly falling apart at home while the headlines still talk about victory. But here's what makes this moment truly different from 2022. Russia didn't just fear a repeat of that exodus. It studied it, learned from it, and quietly built a system designed to make sure it can never happen again. That system was built on a law Putin signed in April 2023, one that completely transformed how military conscription works in Russia. Draft notices no longer need to be delivered in person. They're now issued digitally through a centralized government portal called Gosuslugi, the same platform Russians use to pay taxes or renew a passport. The scope of information this system pulls together is staggering. Home addresses, workplaces, education records, tax filings, pension details, medical history, even court records, all connected in one place, all instantly searchable. And here's the part that should genuinely alarm anyone paying attention. 7 days after a digital summons appears in someone's account, it is legally considered received, whether that person has actually opened it or not. That means hiding, moving, or simply ignoring the notification no longer works. The moment that summons is legally served, the person is automatically barred from leaving the country. The only way to lift that travel ban is to physically show up at a military enlistment office and face whatever comes next. According to independent reports from inside Russia, these notifications often arrive in the middle of the night, buzzing phones awake with life-changing news delivered in complete silence. No knock on the door, no uniformed officer at the doorstep, just a notification on a screen that quietly rewrites someone's entire future. And if someone still refuses to report, an automatic chain of punishments begins. After 20 days, their driver's license gets suspended. They can't take out loans. They can't buy or sell property. They can't register a car, start a business, or apply for a passport. None of these penalties require a judge or a courtroom. The system simply switches off a person's economic life on its own without a single human being ever reviewing the case. After 27 days of continued avoidance, the person is officially registered as a draft evader, a crime under Russian law that can carry fines or up to 2 years in prison. Even the borders themselves have been wired into this network. Russia's security services now have direct access to conscription databases at every airport and land crossing. If your name shows up flagged in the system, you're stopped immediately, taken aside, and formally warned before being sent back home. Your travel plans erased in the space of a single scan. This isn't a theory. It's already happening quietly in real time. In late 2025, digital draft summons became the default method across Moscow and 3 surrounding regions. That single wave of conscription pulled in 135,000 men, the largest draft since 2016. Around the same time, Russian lawmakers began discussing a bill to stretch conscription across the entire year instead of limiting it to specific seasonal windows. By early 2026, reports confirmed the travel bans were being enforced automatically, silently, without a single headline announcing it to the public. This is exactly why analysts have started calling what's happening in Russia right now by a new name. Not mobilization, not conscription, covert mobilization. A quiet, invisible tightening of control that doesn't need tanks in the streets or dramatic television announcements. It just needs a database, a digital signature, and 7 silent days. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Putin didn't just build an army to fight Ukraine. He built a system to trap his own people inside the war, one designed to close every exit before anyone even realizes the door has shut behind them. The soldiers who once marched proudly under Russian flags in 2022 are now being replaced by men pulled off the street, prisoners promised freedom, and foreigners tricked across borders with false job offers. The volunteers are gone. What remains is a machine running purely on coercion, fear, and paperwork nobody ever gets to argue against. And that raises the question every strategist in Moscow is quietly avoiding. A country can force its people to fight, but can it force them to believe in a war they no longer trust? History suggests otherwise. Armies built on fear eventually break, not on the battlefield first, but from within, quietly, one deserter, one refusal, one silent act of resistance at a time. Now I want to hear from you directly. Do you think Russia can survive another wave of mobilization without shattering something inside its own society? Or has that breaking point already quietly arrived, hidden behind official denials and delayed announcements? Type your honest answer below. We genuinely read every single comment. And if this video helped you understand what's really happening behind the headlines, hit subscribe, tap that bell, and share it with someone who still believes this war is being fought by willing men. The truth deserves to travel further than the propaganda ever will.